This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. We speak from our personal experiences and opinions. The views expressed are solely those of the individual speaker and are not intended to malign any group, club, organization, or business.
Hey, welcome back to Confronting the Line, everyone. I'm excited to be here today with two of my somewhat regulars who will become even more regular if I have anything to say about it. I have a little posse of what I call resident experts that when I have these topics that I want to take on, these two guests and Ed Gerwitz and a couple others are people I pull on regularly because of their particular background and expertise in these areas. Today, we're going to be looking at something that's been driving me bananas, which shows up a lot in the personal development space, which is this sort of insinuation that trauma is something that we can get over and cure with our like a new context or something. Also embedded in it often is this kind of trope that trauma is a choice. So that's going to be our subject today. And before I get into that, I want to introduce my guest just a little bit for those of you who maybe haven't seen some of the previous episodes, which will all be linked in the show notes. But first of all, I want you all to meet again, Betz. What I want everybody to know about Anne and why I called on Anne is she's the co-founder of Be Above Leadership and an international speaker and trainer on the intersection of neuroscience, coaching, and human transformation. In 2011, Anne studied neuroscience at the graduate level and using this fascinating research in 2012 developed and is the senior leader for Be Above Leadership's popular training program for advanced coaches. Neuroscience, Consciousness, and Transformational Coaching, a program I'm very proud to say that I'm in right now and loving. Just really appreciative of Anne's expertise. Anne was also a faculty member and served as a neuroscience consultant to the Coaches Training Institute for many years. She provides neuroscience, leadership, and coaching consulting to many other corporations and not-for-profits, including the International Coaching Federation. As a certified professional coach for 20 years, Anne is the author of groundbreaking white paper on brain research and coaching, which we'll probably also link in the notes. I wanted to take a moment to introduce that. And then Brian and I don't have nearly as spiffy of write-ups ready to go. But Brian is really quickly becoming a partner and dear friend. I'm really loving Brian getting to play with you in this deeper way. Why I invited Brian here today, besides his deep way of thinking and taking things apart, is he is a military veteran, served in the military and had how many tours in Afghanistan? Two?
A long one.
Long tour in Afghanistan shortly after having completed Landmark's curriculum for living. And then when he came out of his tour in Afghanistan, promptly went back to Landmark, a well-known international training and development company on human performance. I always call them kind of the big kids in the block of the human potential seminar companies. And Brian went to work for them, was a staff member, program leader, big time assistant. So in an effort to kind of put himself back together and came to really see how much that work doesn't work for PTSD and trauma. And we have been talking a lot about that. So we'll make sure to link our previous episodes. So I wanted to have this conversation with you two. I literally texted them both in the middle of the week last week. Will you guys come on and talk to me about blah, 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 blah? Because 3 times in 1 week, I had somebody somewhere either send me something or say something to me that insinuated, if not outright said, something along the lines of trauma is a choice. We can overcome trauma through choice. And as my audience knows, I have a daughter who's been diagnosed with complex trauma. I've been walking beside her for 12 years as she's actively worked on surviving that, quite honestly, and working in her own recovery. So I've become deeply acquainted with trauma. But more than that, since my book came out and hundreds of people have reached out to me about not all of it is trauma they experienced out of participating in large group awareness trainings and organizations like Landmark. Some of it is. But one thing that is consistent is many of them, most of us have trauma that we went to these groups to help resolve and are quite surprised to find somewhere in our lives it didn't work for that. Not the way we thought it did. Not that it didn't make a difference sometimes in the moment. We'll get into that. But it doesn't actually work for real trauma. So before I jumped in, so I actually prepared today with a bunch of questions and we're going to attempt to follow them. But before I jump into that, I want to just turn the mic over to you guys if you want to add anything to my introduction of you or what interests you in this subject or just anything that you want to say before we kind of jump into some of our questions here.
Well, I will say very quickly that also part of my background is I am a former short-term staff member for
That's right.
Landmark. I did the S training. You can figure out how old I am if you know anything about the history. 1982 when I was 18, or you just figure that out from that. And then was one of those, kind of full-time assistants. And so spent about 8 to 9 years at a very formative time in my life, very, very involved. And I also now teach a course on working with trauma. So I have a trauma background as well as neuroscience and, the neuroscience, what it does to the brain, all of that.
Beautiful.
And I would just add correction. I served in Iraq,
Iraq.
Afghanistan. So we were part of the earliest wave in transporting troops across the border from Kuwait and then occupying, actually taken airfield and establishing operations at the beginning of that conflict in 2002. Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm excited to be here with Ann
Thank you.
Betz. I always love Ann Peterson, but I have only what I've discovered myself from the living of it. So it's cool to be here with a neuro expert who really understands how trauma functions mechanically. So this is going to be
Some
awesome.
degree, but your
Yeah.
lived experience is how we know these things, as well as it's not just the brain scans, it's what people, it's this sort of, academic, this is how it is, but then there's the lived experience that says that is not my experience. I can't just think my way out of this. I can't just do cognitive behavioral therapy and take a new perspective. I mean, I can, but it doesn't heal everything because it's happening on such a systemic way. So the lived experience is absolutely critical. And I think what's happening in the field is we are having more and more respect for that, deep respect for the lived experience.
Well, you guys just organically brought up, so the thing we're here to really explore is this trauma as a choice,
Mm.
quickly followed by we can cure trauma tropes that we hear so often in the seminar world, in even the coaching space. I kind of put it all in this bucket called human potential, one that's kind of been defined. But also, what I'm referring to in there is these. Generally, they're non-therapeutic, sometimes done by therapists, but non-therapeutic approaches to human performance, our performance and our ability to be better, essentially.
And you just nailed a piece of it, right?
Yeah.
That it's focused on performance rather than recovery is it should be a red flag. Like that right there is an indicator that these may not be the right tools. So I
Well,
just had to throw
and
that in.
though, as recovery has become more and more understood, don't have no doubt that a lot of these characters are now promising recovery through their
Mhm.
programs. I have one, I sent it to Anne actually shortly after I started her program, which is a year long, people. It is not, I keep getting these ads for this efficient coach certification thing.
It takes a
It's going to
while
teach
to
you
learn
how
what
to
you
be a neuroscience coach
know,
in 30 days. And
so you
I
can't.
keep commenting, this is crap. I know that by the amount of days you're saying. And that's 30 days. And these programs, I mean, the forum, the advanced course, the kinds of programs we taught at Landmark, those were 3 days, 4 days, whatnot. You discover at the end that there's always a little bit more, which is the next program. But there's
Hand in your pocket, pull out some more money. Right.
So it's interesting, Brian, because you're right. And I am seeing a lot of people are promising these recovery formulas. And that's what really came up. The third person who brought something to me this week, and it's somebody I love and trust very much. And, he's a good friend. And he asked my feedback on a chapter of a book that he's writing. And he kind of had he used a formulaic approach to trauma, drama, bliss, right? And while the background of what he's saying is actually good and accurate, what I pushed back on was reducing any one of those three things to a formula. And look, I get why it's happening. Our marketplace kind of requires that in order for you to make a living. I got to have a formula, so I have a thing that I can sell.
Can I give a little historical perspective?
Sure.
And it's actually, and Brian, you probably know this, but so, this whole idea of PTSD first came out of the military, and it came out of World War I, where they were noticing people shell shock, what they called shell shock at the time. And it was so broad spread, they had to notice that it actually was a thing, that people couldn't, physically they were okay, but mentally they couldn't perform what they needed them to perform, which was to go back on the front lines again. And so the view is get you serving the system again. How do you serve the system again? Whether the system is war, because that's what it's, PTSD and everything. The treatment is not about you healing, but the treatment is get you back fighting again. We need to get you functional in the way the system needs you to be functional. So the whole other system, and Brian, I think you alluded to this, is we need you functional for the capitalist system. Get out there and perform again. But I think there's a heritage in terms of where this first, this deep trauma understanding first started being discussed, that it does come out of the military and people facing something that they could not process. Your system and being is not designed to process war at the level it was experienced in, probably before this, but we really noticed it in World War I. Brian, is there any, what would you add to that historically?
Yeah, that was brilliant.
Yes.
But it's true. You can
The-
see the transition, right? To
Yeah.
society.
And the layer I would add is that shell shock, like widely, was viewed as like a broken person. Like you have
Effective.
been broken.
Yeah.
And what it took to go from like World War I and shell shock through the years, it really seems like it was like Desert Storm and like the like early 2000s incursion into Afghanistan and Iraq for that conversation to transition into post-traumatic stress disorder. So really dealing with it as a disorder rather than like a state of unrecoverable brokenness as a result of an experience, and to start to develop approaches for treatment.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
and there's, and when you're talking about, this kind of, for me, what is sort of underneath this idea of trauma is a choice, is this idea that the system's not responsible. You're
exactly.
responsible. And this is part
And
of,
you have control. I mean, I think part of that too is we want to believe that we have 100% total dominion and control over everything.
right, and that it's all about what we can think about, whereas what our bodies are wanting to do is anything they can do to keep us safe.
Well, and I mean, this is it's such a wide topic because you could boil it all down to mind over matter and the ways that that has been spread across like modern culture, that mind over body. And there's an element of something biological that happens in significant, complex traumas that does not fit inside that worldview. And then you layer on top of that the human potential movement or the personal development stuff or transformation are all predicated on conscious shifts in mental patterning to alter human performance and behavior, producing unprecedented results as a result of language driven logical construct. And then in like to face the fact, and that's like immensely useful and powerful in a lot of ways, but then you meet people who just freaking wired differently. That's why you don't put certain kinds of people into those programs, because it just doesn't fucking work when you are wired differently. And when that wiring is not a result of genetics or a birth condition, but it's an onset that follows an incident or a series of incidents. Unraveling trauma is more complicated than think differently.
And I love what you're saying, because what I would say, here is the problem. If it were just wrong, if it were just totally wrong that our thoughts, our perspectives don't impact our, ability to be more effective in life, if that were just wrong, it would be easier. But it's not totally wrong. There's an aspect, and so I think of it as the problem is that there's your systems and then there's your personal belief. And both are having an impact, and the human development world doesn't want to acknowledge the impact of the system, particularly when that system is creating trauma, which we've seen with different levels of involvement
Because
in large, right?
the system isn't something we can control. So I
Right.
can't promise you a resolution. So, Anne, can you break down for us what is happening in the brain of someone experiencing a trauma response? And how
Oh
does
my
that
God. Well,
neurological reality?
it's super huge. Let me just
Yeah.
say, I'm going to go a
Yeah.
different direction real
Sure.
quickly first, because here's something that is, so one of the things about neuroscience is it's a very young field. It's like 60 years old. We've only really had brain scanners for about 30 years, so we're learning more. And we're getting validated, like some of what social science has known is now getting validated in neuroscience. And here's an aspect. There's something that social science, I want to make sure I get it right, figured out a while ago, which is called the fundamental attribution error. And the fundamental attribution error says it's your fault. And it's sort of like our brains go there if we're trying to figure out, like, why somebody's, got carjacked. Well, they drove down the wrong street, rather than we got a problem with carjacking in this town, right? I live near Albuquerque. They got a lot of carjacking. I live in Santa Fe. But anyway, so it's like, oh, well, I live in Santa Fe, so that won't happen to me, right? That's an attribution error, rather than I'm looking at personal choice and personal sort of personality aspects to attribute why something is happening. So social science has known we do this. It's like, well, what was she wearing?
I was just going to say, yeah, your
That's
skirt was too
fundamental.
short.
It's not about that. It's about the system of that is abusive to women. Okay. So here's what they found in neuroscience. It takes more cognitive energy to think about the impact of a system. You have to activate certain areas in the prefrontal cortex to understand the role a system will play. So here's the classic thing. It's like somebody slips on a wet floor. It's easier to blame them, and it doesn't take as much cognitive power to say, well, they're clumsy, rather than to say, why is this floor always wet? Or is there a leak somewhere? We just don't do that because of it feels like a cognitive overload to figure it out. Easier just to blame the person. So it benefits the system, and it's just easier cognitively not to think about how the system is part of this. But the truth of the matter is, if we want to address trauma in this world, we have to address things like capitalism and the military industrial complex, things like that. It's not just about, oh, Brian, you got, broken, so let's just fix you. It's like, why were you exposed to that in the first? Human beings shouldn't have to be exposed to that.
Yeah.
That doesn't work for us.
Well, and it loops into not my fault, not my problem.
That's what I was wondering. Does that work in reverse too?
Inconvenient to consider, like that someone slips on a wet floor. Did I spill something last time I was over there? Is there something I should have done or I could have done that could have prevented that? Like, is that person is that person okay? Rather than well, they're clumsy, right? Like, what an initial response. And it's all driven like for the comfort and convenience of our personal worldview and our view of ourselves, so that we don't have to engage in any kind of introspection because it's not on me.
Right.
How does this fit though with, okay, so my husband and I are, one of our businesses, mostly one of my husband, is real estate development and hotel. We used to build hotels and manage them, right? Okay, so the your water on the floor example, I have very direct experiences with this as both an event producer and hotel manager. Because there's another side. How does this fit in too, where people, it's easier to go, that stupid hotel staff, they're not doing their job. It feels, but they both feel short-circuited somehow. Like the blaming of
There's
myself short circuits.
and
Yes.
this is the simplistic, the overly simplistic view. And that's why I say it's a Venn. So if I see a wet floor sign, my responsibility is maybe to go, okay, maybe I should walk a little more carefully. But if it's, if the hotel knows they have a problem with a leak, a water heater's leaking, and they do nothing about it ever because it's just let everybody just be personally responsible for that, that's not okay. But it's also not okay that, it's a one-time thing. Somebody spilled their Coke and the floor is slippery. And I'm just like, well, it shouldn't be slippery. So if I fall, I'm going to sue you. There's this intersection, and it can be challenging to pick apart, to say, because it's not just an absolute 50-50 Venn diagram. Sometimes it's, 20-10, 20-80. It's very hard. Like, what is my responsibility? What is the system's responsibility? Hard to figure. It's not clear, which is why we don't like to think about it.
Well, and then you layer onto that what drove the response. What drove the response of the observer? What drove the response of the hotel staff, the guest services person? What drove the response of the person who slipped? So if that response is driven by like a complete like past hinged trauma that drives a certain internal behavior, like the simplistic word is a trigger,
Right.
then you've got 3 triggered people and nobody looking at the neutral whole of the situation itself.
That's
Right?
a good word. I like that, the neutral whole. I think about, like I said, it would be easier if it were just wrong. Like, we have no personal responsibility. That's just wrong. But I think, when I first did the S training at age 18, this was radical for me. I had not been taught that I really had any kind of ability to shape or create my life. And the idea that I did, really at age 18, there were, this is where we get into your line, Anne, that was actually really helpful to me. And I think has been helpful in my life. And so I think about the layers of human beings. There's the ones where nothing is my fault. And we see a lot of that in the world today. It's like everything is somebody else's responsibility. They need to get, no, you have personal responsibility. I work with a lot of people who are very awake. I work with a lot of coaches. I work with a lot of quite aware folks. They need to learn not everything is their responsibility.
Well, that's why and this is a whole other show, but, and everybody's been listening for one of those, I'm on the warpath against the notion of 100% responsibility. So responsibility is on the light side of the road. 100% responsibility is on the dark side of the road, harmful side, helpful side. What I like to think, and what in my own coaching and in my own, facilitation work, I now talk about shared responsibility, that we come together and part of what's in that shared responsibility is the situation. It's almost like there's 3 things. There's me, there's them, and there's the situation or the circumstance, or whatever. Because I can tell you from the hotel perspective, if we stay in our
Wet
my
floor.
analogy of the floor, well, but it's all different, right? Because the hotel manager, my husband, I can just hear him in my head right now. We're going to get sued. We're going to get sued. We're going to get sued, right? The staff person, I'm going to get fired. I'm going to get fired. I'm going to get fired. The guest, oh, they hurt me, And then depending on their personality type, either they're going to make themselves wrong for not having seen it, or they're going to make the other people wrong for having caused that. So I've had it happen at events.
Yeah, and parsing that out is complex. I mean, this is what I see as part of sustained transformation. I think of it in terms of an evolution, as you're saying, but that, part of that is required is the ability to think with complexity and the ability to handle paradox. And if I'm with someone who cannot handle paradox and it is absolutely black and white, I'm thinking, well, they're probably still working at a different aspect of evolution, because
Right. Well, and that's why I do want you to speak a little bit from the neuroscience perspective, and then I'm going to ask Brian from the
yeah,
experience of his war experience and what he's since learned in his own recovery. But I think for our audience, can we break down trauma itself a little bit? Because I think that's part of it too, is we don't like now the word trauma is like everywhere,
I was
all over the place.
traumatized,
And one of the ways that I've seen it minimized or used in ways that I think can be harmful in the coaching personal development world is, well, everybody has trauma.
which
Everybody has trauma. And
yeah,
birth is traumatic. I mean, I hear, and I do have to say, I do hear this mostly from people of privilege. You very rarely hear that from people who have significant societal or structural disadvantages and or have had extreme experiences like Brian. So I'd like us to spend just a little bit of time and maybe start with you, Anne. Can you just tell us what is happening from a
yeah, with
neuroscience perspective when
real
someone
trauma. Yeah.
having a traumatic experience? Like what makes something a traumatic experience versus some other kind?
Versus, distressing or upsetting. You can be upset without being traumatized. You're not traumatized because DoorDash messed up your order. If you can be upset, you can be angry, but it's
Be
not,
triggered if you are somebody with trauma.
it could be, the world's out to get me. But I think, and I don't have my handy dandy, like, definition to read you of trauma, but it's really about the system of the human being. And it's not just the brain, it's the body and we might even call it the energetic system is overwhelmed and cannot process what it is dealing with. I will say one of the reasons I started teaching a trauma class to coaches, it's kind of like, "Oh, isn't that therapist?" is that it will often come into coaching even when the person isn't really aware of it. And, there is this kind of that it kind of is everywhere. And I think there's really good work done around something called the adverse childhood experiences research. You can go online, you can look up what is my ACEs score, which has to do with what you maybe experienced at a very young age. That will have an impact and a particularly strong impact on your nervous system. And high ACEs scores tend to leave you more exposed to other things in life later being processed as more traumatic. Even war experiences is some of what they found. And so what that will do briefly, it's like, what is the impact on the system? It impacts every part of the system. But probably the biggest one is that your sympathetic nervous system, particularly if you've had a lot of early childhood, uh, high ACEs scores in your childhood, adverse childhood experiences, nervous system gets wired to be very on alert, quick to fire, quick to go into fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Fawn is like a little fawn in the woods, like, "Don't hurt me. I'll do whatever you need me to do. It's okay," walking on eggshells, all of that. And they're starting to see that that's actually more common response even than fight, flight, freeze, that the
It's one of the
fawn.
reasons some of the legal stuff falls through when you try to hold people to account because it'll get used against the victim. But you were so nice. I even had to actually I coached one of the staff members or one of the aides of Warner's that had come to me asking for help around being physically assaulted. Um, that and they needed to leave. I said, first thing you need to do is leave. You need to
Yeah.
leave
You
dangerous.
can't heal within the system that is damaging you.
Yeah, you
because your
have to leave.
nervous system will be on alert and it will not let you heal.
And I've coached a number of staff members this way, and my coaching always is, I've changed it just a little bit since understanding this fawn thing, but at that time it was, "Thank you for the opportunity. It has been amazing. My last day will be." I coached them to fawn, essentially, to get out, which is a way sometimes we have to use that to get out, 'cause fawning works very well on narcissistic supply. So that, that'll come into play sometimes, those things. Other times you've got to use others, but there's a valid survival response in those 4 things, and I think we forget that too. Like,
Yeah.
like
So
my human performance and potential is about never fighting, fleeing, freezing, or fawning. You'd be dead if you didn't have those 4 things as.
Yeah. And real quick, and then Brian, I know you want to say something, but this goes back to the choice. That is not a choice. That is about my human soft body needs to be safe. I will choose safety over self expression. Everyone will. It's
Mm,
not a choice. It's what, and especially if the threat seems particularly salient.
part of what I would say about what is trauma points back toward systems. So we're exploring this conversation in English.
Mm,
The answer to that question will be profoundly different in Japanese. The perception of the world is shaped by the language in which we think.
hmm
So trauma is a noun. It's a or like, it's like a thing that happened, like there's an incident, right? Okay, so that's one small part, the simplistic part, the part that everybody agrees upon, actually, because it requires the least effort. Then there's the what is trauma that goes, like, it lives in a place beyond speaking. So your nervous system is not wired in the English language. It is wired in biochemistry.
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
don't speak biochemistry. We can't have a conversation back and forth with our nervous system to retrain the malformed importance of those survival responses that were intended to get us through an incident that are then weighted as a what was it? You said something earlier, like a formula.
hmm
It
mhm.
becomes a formula that is often incorrectly applied. So we have malformed survival formulas as a result of stimulus that some of which was cognitively influenced at the level we were capable of processing at the time that
Whatever
occurred,
time it was.
which is always in the case of trauma formation at a time when we weren't fully equipped to effectively process it. And then those things get wired in our brains, in our systems, in our bodies to us survive as if that thing recurs. Like, this is like that. We learn by association. We also survive by association. And like, so all of that, like, that's a why you can't talk yourself out of trauma. It's useful. It helps. Like, the what am I at choice about? How much of this is a linguistic construct? How much am I living as if everything is held in the context of the victim I am and the what happened to me? Now, some of that is baseline very true, actually true. Some of it is constructed for benefit, for survival. It's a highly complex, like, fawn survival network. And when we start to disassemble that, we can get at the truth of what's happening biologically. But sometimes you have to shovel all your own shit out of the way before you can begin to see what's actually at play. That's where the ontological paradigm is useful. But when you lean into that ontological paradigm as if it is the answer. And you don't have room for the paradox of everything is given by my word, my will, and like what I have to say about who I am as a human being and the world around me. And simultaneously be able to hold something happened I had no control over. I have no power over what's happening in my body. And then add a third layer of there are things I can do to regain control in both of those areas. That's not just black and white. It's like black, white, and purple.
Oh my God, there's so much there. Oh my God.
Paradox is not about finding the middle ground of those three pieces like a Venn diagram does. It's a little too simple. Because paradox is really owning that white is white, black is black, purple is purple. And you've got to be able to hold three things that belong in three different universes because all are simultaneously useful and true, and none of them go together.
And reconciling that, and I just love everything you're saying. I want to talk about memory a little bit, but because it's a big, big impact of trauma, one of the biggest. But I'll be working with very aware people, and they're sort of like, but I don't want to be a victim. I don't want to talk about my trauma because I don't want to have a victim story. My classic line is, you can be victimized without being a victim. And we need to pull those apart. Doesn't mean you have to.
Send you my paper I wrote on this because this is another
I
one of
love
my
that.
rants.
Yeah. Like doesn't need to be your identity, but it can be a truth that you need to be able to look at. And I think what's really coming to me about what you're saying, Brian, is that sometimes the value in, what I think about large group awareness training and transformation, what I think it's good for is the first step, which is I call realization. It's awareness. It's often very good. Like I learn from other people's stories and from the processes. But for trauma, it's not where I'm going to find my healing, but I may discover there's something there to be healed that I wasn't aware of. And what we know about trauma these days is that the most effective solutions are not the talk therapy. They're things that work more energetically. There's things like, I'm not talking about doing this recreationally, but guided, very well done work with psychedelics. It has a lot of potential.
With a trained professional people.
Yeah, not on your own. It's not
But also not a self-help person.
no, and not necessarily, we're talking about people that understand the role in trauma. But what that does is it disrupts a particular network of your brain that is creating an emotional response. It shuts that network down so that you can kind of reprogram it. And that's also what eye movement desensitization and reprogramming does, EMDR. Very, very helpful in trauma, because what we have to do is sort of shut one thing down so that a new possibility can come up, and it doesn't happen through just talk therapy.
Or talk program. We're not, and I'm just going to keep bringing it back to, because I just know I talk to so many people every week, every day that are using the wrong tool for the right job. And that's, to me, that's a lot of why I keep doing Confronting the Lines, because let's sort out what's the right tools for the right jobs. But to do that, we also have to figure out what's the wrong tools. This idea that I can just, it struck me what you said, Brian, at the ontological paradigm. And there's a lot of confusion in the landmark world about what ontology actually is. But if we say like who I'm being part, the ontological part almost always comes after the trauma. So I just want to talk about the sequence for it, because you both have touched on it a little bit. Something happens, and the same thing can happen to Brian, Anne with an E. And one of the three of us or two of the three of us could experience that as a traumatic thing, and one of us could not. Like it's very individualized, which is why I've kind of pushed back against formulas. But something happens, and this is how we talk about it in the forum, right? Something happens, and then I have a story about what happened, and what you have to deal with is the story that you made up about what happened. But the problem with the forum is it still never deals with what happened at that physiological
And
level, that emotional level, at that. And that's
Lives
what
in your body, yeah.
my daughter used to say, like, oh my gosh, she got so sick when her complex trauma really showed up. I mean, it showed up in her teen years. She was diagnosed ADHD and so forth. And I would discover later that some of her doctors and therapists knew about some of the particular incidences, things that happened that set up her trauma. But for years and tens of thousands, can I just tell you, tens of thousands of dollars of all kinds of therapies, my daughter would say again and again, "It's in my body. It's in my body. It's in my body. It's in," and
Good for her.
therapists and TMD, blah, blah, blah. I mean, she did eventually get into EMDR. And what's unfortunate is now that some of the therapeutic methods are catching up, we actually are not financially in a position to have her do any of those. So she's currently white knuckling. I'll just never forget that. Her as this like 19-year-old and 20-year-old, and she was so sick. And she's like, "It's in my body. It's in my body." And even I, with all this training, d- I knew enough to shut up and listen. That was all I could do because I couldn't relate. I didn't understand. I eventually, of course, read Body Keeps the Score and, things like that. But
It violated your framework and your
Mhm.
view of the world.
Well, I
To,
couldn't help her. It
yeah,
wasn't even that it's that my tools couldn't help. And I kinda knew that. I would discover later the ways in which they actually created some harm, but they couldn't help. And, as a mom, that's all you want. You just wanna make your kids better. I
No,
don't care what it takes.
there's
and
an
then that's just
interesting
down to like knowledge of what the tools are.
and what the process is when I'm teaching working with trauma. And one of the things we look at is when is the trauma so severe that it's not appropriate for coaching and you really need somebody with different training. So we deal with that. But I'm working with someone who can really be an observer and participate in the process. Even then, we work with a model. I call it the dawn to dawn model because what I'm going to be working with in terms of someone at one stage, and I'll give you an example of this, is when they're first waking up and going, "Oh my God, I think that I was in an abusive relationship," or whatever it was, is not where you're going to be when they are sort of coming full circle. So here's my example of this. So the reason I started teaching a trauma course is I inadvertently, not intentionally, because nobody does, got involved with a narcissist, a covert narcissist who presented quite, as
Oh, they
if he,
present amazing.
oh, he was amazing. He was everything I wanted. Oh my God, soulmate, like that. And then got into this relationship, even with all my knowledge, it's about 8 years ago, and was like, what the hell's going on? And I didn't know about covert narcissists. I only knew about, the overt, larger than life. So anyway, I've tried to bottom line this. So I finally kind of figured out what was going on and like why it was so hot and cold and why it was not the way now it had been in the beginning, and my communication strategies were not working. Finally figured it out. And I called a friend of mine who's a coach. And I'm like, I figured out what's going on. This guy's like probably a sociopath. Like he's just not a. And she said, "Oh, that's so interesting. How is that part of your big story?" I know. And
This is my other big part. You just
I'm
nailed it.
literally like in my car trying to figure out if I'm safe to go home, if he's going to do something to my cats, where am I going to live? We had a house together. Like I'm at the survival, Maslow's hierarchy, survival state. And I had enough wherewithal to go, that is not a question I care to answer right now. Thank you very much. Click. Now, here's what's interesting. So this is a good friend. And she came over like 2 years later. I'd been through the whole thing. I got him out of my house, got my house back. I'm exploring all of this. I'm reading everything I can read, all, including, probably your book came a little later, but I'm in this world. And she said, we're having tea. And she said, "I'm so sorry I asked you that. And that was so inappropriate that I asked you that." I said, "No, it was just really bad timing. Ask me now. Now it's interesting. Now the meaning making is useful." I had to go through the whole process of navigating the terror, figuring out how I got out of I was in freeze for probably a year. I didn't even know how to move forward, maybe not a year, but a number of months where I didn't even know how to navigate this very traumatic thing, the worst thing I've ever been through.
Well, just pause there for a sec, because there's a part too that you're demonstrating that's really important for folks to understand, which is in these kinds of high control narcissistic relationships or environments, part of the indoctrination process that brings you in and then has you like stay there is this idea that you can control everything by being at the source of it, by being 100% responsible for it. So that's where that is coming from, is this early indoctrination idea called, we're going to show you how you can have the ultimate power. And it's in your perception, and your perception. So that we could call it a spiritual bypass. I call it trauma bypass.
You gotta, okay, one real quick thing, and then I know Brian probably has a whole bunch of stuff, but my early training with Landmark and all of that probably kept me in longer than if I had been less transformed and more willing to go, blame, because I just, how can I, okay, what else can I try? And how can I communicate
What other
better?
context can I
What is my
create?
response? How am I creating this and all of that? And it wasn't until I was willing to say, this is a bad person, that I could get out.
Yeah. So the retroactive responsibility, it's almost always looking back.
Yes.
When we claim that we're the source of that, we're the cause, right? The question from your friend in the car was really like, well, why did you call this into your life? What lesson is there for you to learn? Like, how are you responsible for this situation? It's always after the realization of fuck. And then it's this retroactive claim of responsibility to create a false sense of power.
Mm-hmm.
When none of that changes anything that is tangibly, physically occurring in the universe. It doesn't change anyone else's behavior. It actually, it lands somewhere in between. Like, it deactivates flight, first of all, completely.
You're just going to try harder. You're just going to be better, right?
Puts a perverse, like a twisted sense of fight in place.
Yes.
And it lands us somewhere in between freeze and fawn. Always. Now, I'm going to say always, and then I am open to like the times when that's not true, but fucking always.
Mostly always. There we can go.
It's not useful to look backward and take ownership for how things got here. It's useful once you're out of the emergency. It's useful once the situation is resolved. I have a person in my life who was just like wildly ashamed of the state she finds herself in. Like, can't pay my bills. I have like shredded wheat and peanut butter in my house, and I'm going to have to get rid of my cats because if I have to choose, I'm going to feed me, and I can't ask for help. It's the most shameful, embarrassing thing I can imagine doing. Like the most like a failure she's ever felt in her whole entire life. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't care what happened. Like, I don't care how you got here. It doesn't matter. My response is not going to come in any way from how responsible you are for this. Fuck that. Like, you need food, you need support, you need compassion.
Right.
Like, you need to like maybe face up to like the shame is actually in the way of resolving it. And like, let's navigate forward. And when we're all done, if you find it useful, perhaps we could look backward. But by that point in time, often why bother?
So it's just, I agree with you. And this is where I said to my friend, a couple years later, ask me now because it's sort of an interesting intellectual exercise. And one of the metaphors that I use for people who are in the middle of trauma, it's like you're a snow globe and the snow globe's been all shaken up. And things will reemerge as the snow globe settles, because one of the things that trauma does is it disrupts. We have four basic areas of memory. I have to look at my notes here because I don't always remember them, but it disrupts memory. So, it's very interesting, and experienced this for myself, that as I was working, using the good tools I had to heal from this trauma, that I'd go, oh, that's interesting. Like a memory would come back that had been blocked. But that's part of how the animal of us stays safe, is that we actually fragment various aspects of memory. And when I'm working with someone in trauma, one of the things I do that's a little bit different than my normal coaching practice is we spend more time with their story. And we do not dismiss it as just a story. And we don't try to alter the story. But I will really work with them on, tell me what some of the early red flags were. Tell me what some of the things, like, to recover that, because it has been most likely fragmented in the process of whatever abuse that they experienced, or shoved down because um, the conscious narrative was, but we're transforming the world one person at a time, or whatever it is. Like, I can't allow myself to think about how much I dislike this. So I'm going to fragment that memory, and we have to rehabilitate the
Yeah.
memory.
And it's that like that there's a defense mechanism in there to survive the nuclear bomb of responsibility misapplied. And it circles back to what you were talking about, Anne, about shared responsibility. Like, this person reached out to me, and rather than doing anything else, and I'm going to challenge shared responsibility because that still has a my part and your part.
Yeah.
It's a
Still
collaborative
always a way
responsibility.
later step anyway, like Anne
Like
said. Wouldn't even work.
finding responsibility for the whole thing together, and like responsibility for the resolution together, regardless of what led up to this moment, and including what led up to this moment. Right. So the thing about trauma being a choice is like, okay, who actually chose shame in that circumstance? Who evaluated their options and decided that crippling shame was the right
The way to
thing?
go.
Right.
Like
Right.
that you and whether or not you can recognize that shame is in the way is a function of how in the grip of your nervous system you are.
You know,
So when your fucking lizard brain is running, your inability to diagnose yourself with shame as a problem that needs addressed is like it's not functionally practical. Like, you're
we
not
can't.
choosing this way. And so that the trauma itself, choice doesn't come into play until you can recognize what's actually happening and then step forward. It's like once you've recovered enough from that amygdala to like identify, okay, what's the plan here? That's where choice begins to start to get a foothold in the situation.
Well, that's why we look at, when I'm working with it, I say the model that I talk about, it's just a model. It's not the model, but, it works for me, is this idea of, what's happening as someone's just waking up to the trauma, what's happening, the dawn, what's happening midday, what's happening in the afternoon, in the evening, and it's not a linear process
Well, and you
at all.
rationalize all day long. You wake up, you dread going to work. You get there, you realize, oh, this isn't so bad. I really, I need this. Oh, it's worth it. It's not that bad. I can stand this. Oh, okay, it's fine. Oh, they apologized. I'm over it. Let's have a new day. And you go to sleep like wiped out, but like having survived another day. And then you wake up and you dread going back there again. And then you rationalize all the way through it again. And like this, we're going to like start pulling all your freaking episodes together. Like this is the downward spiral of moral injury. Like
Well,
you
no,
compromise yourself in those situations. You wake up or you wake up in a positive attitude, like today is the day. God bless those people. I wish I was those
well,
people.
maybe they had a really good coaching session the day before and they
Yeah.
give it, this happened to me. My best friend was walking alongside me, and I want to say something about that. She got me through this. Ursula, Ann knows her. She's walking beside her, and we would unpack it, and we'd be talking about it, spend hours. I'm like, I'm going to try that, and then I would try it and it wouldn't work. And I'm
No.
just like, shit. But one of the things about trauma, and if I think about healing, and I'm thinking about your beautiful story about your friend with the shredded wheat and the peanut butter, is that we don't experience trauma. Generally, there's someone on the other side of it. Now, it could be a whole system, like in your case with war. It could be a toxic person, like in my case, but we don't experience it just generally. There are exceptions, obviously, but natural disasters and things like that. We don't tend to experience alone, and we do not heal from it alone. And what is the most healing thing is compassion. And that is what I found missing when I recovered a memory when I was first involved with the landmark form, the S training at the time. I actually remembered that I had been abused as a child, that memory had gotten shoved down. And in a seminar, I was like, oh, crap, that happened to me. And because I'm a good participant and, courageous and like that. And I shared about that. And the response from the leader was basically, like, what did you get out of that? And there was no being held with compassion and, you know, or any kind of resources or any understanding. Now, of course, this was a long time ago, but I don't think it's changed that much.
There's no trauma training in that world.
No.
No.
But there's a couple of ideas that both of you brought up that I also want to debunk. I want your help debunking because they've kind of come up and they're common in that set. And look, guys, we're picking on Landmark because we have that shared experience. And I told them, you're going to suck up 30 years of my life. You're going to get picked on a lot. Sorry, not sorry. So, but I do want to express that these things we're talking about, I have heard of in virtually
Yeah.
all of them: insight, context, coaching, and even in some therapeutic environments.
And
So I
in
want to
coaching, in some
spread around. If you're listening and you're like, well, I didn't do Landmark, thank God. Yeah, but if you participated in a human potential self-help group, chances are you've heard some of these misguided ideas. So one of the ones you guys brought up is that how we resolve trauma is to get to the source of it, to go back to, and we really are understanding some real neuroscience is opening up some amazing new knowledge for us about what a bad idea this is basically. But somebody told me about it. Well, let's go back to the earlier similar. What's the thing? Because the idea there is if we get to what's happened, we just get what's happened separated from what I made it mean. Voila. And we now know that doesn't work in the
we have to
case of,
take it out of the
Well,
body.
it's like it's what Anne said. It's only step one. It's the voila, you're healed. That's the lie. Once you separate what happened from what you made it mean, then you have to deal with the impact what happened had and the impact of living with the meaning had
right, the
and heal
conditioner.
both of those routes.
I think find a way, and this is where EMDR was super helpful for me. Again, eye movement, repatterning, and I can't remember what it stands. I can never remember what it stands for. Just look up EMDR. But it was super helpful for me because it sort of decoupled energetically in my body And, if you're working with a well-trained practitioner, they are guiding the questions that they're asking you. But I was able to decouple. It wasn't really about the news story. It's kind of didn't matter. If you've ever done it, you're just, you're basically being cued to move your eyes back and forth. I'm going to tell you from a neuroscience perspective why that seems to work, but you're just talking. And what's happening as you're talking, it kind of doesn't matter that much what you're saying, is that your brain is processing this. This is very interesting. Your brain is processing it as if you're moving toward the frightening thing because of the eyes going back and forth. And that was the insight of the person who created this. It's not a panacea. I think I consider it sort of part of the process. But as I'm talking about something that's difficult to talk about or stream of consciousness, my brain is associating it as, instead of going away from this, I'm actually sort of step by step walking toward it, and I don't have to fear it. And that can decouple the panic and the nervous system response to this, whatever the trigger is.
Aren't
So
you kind of fundamentally retraining your nervous system a bit?
yeah, it's like, we're going to talk about it, we're going toward it, and the nervous system is like, therefore I can be with it. Again, it's not necessarily the only thing. You need to have a trained practitioner who does this. Usually only therapists can be trained to do it. But I think it's a really good thing as part of the toolkit that is, and it's not about that while you do it, I'm probably over explaining, but that you come up with this great new cognitive story. That doesn't matter. It's just the fact that you talked about it while your eyes were going back and forth does something to your nervous system that says to your nervous system, you're safe.
And it's dealing with the emotion in emotion rather than dealing with emotion in language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, somebody told me that I love knitting, so I've gotten super into knitting. And so we were talking about this at the EMDR and whatnot on one of our women's circles. I'm like, oh my gosh, when I'm really agitated, if I have a knitting project that's just straight back and forth, I will literally go do that to calm down.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, no wonder that's working. So last time I've been doing these lap GANs. Right now I'm doing one that's a big cable pattern, and I could tell you cable patterns, it doesn't work. You got to do straight back and forth. But I kept finding myself triggered around the word transformation. Like I would get agitated, like just
Body
so
was a response. Yeah.
exactly. And really it's mostly because I've heard so much harm in the last 2 years. I spent 25 years seeing mostly just the positive or what I thought was positive. Last 2 years, I've heard a lot of harm, right? And that's had an effect on me. So I literally, next time I went and knitted the same lap GAN again, because it's a simple back and forth one. And I'm like, transformation, transformation, transformation. And it was so interesting because after about 7 rows, I was like, transformation. Like it was interesting to see how it like calmed the body down.
It's I got to tell you just a quick story. So I spent the summer for various reasons, I spent the summer in Colorado, and the place that I was living was very close to a small airport. And these planes would come over and it was like constant and they were really loud. And I started to get really triggered by the noise. I have some noise sensitivity. I'm a highly sensitive person. And so goddamn planes. And I'm like, I can't wait to go home. Then I came home and I never heard the planes before, but now I'm overly sensitized to it. So I'm hearing all of the planes going by and it's not quite as bad. So what did I do? I just started doing this. I'd sit on the couch and I would just say out loud or to myself any thought that I had. And, it just started with the planes, but my eyes are going back and forth. And now, because I was having a physiological response, my nervous system was on alert. I was flooded with adrenaline, cortisol, all of this. And then at some point, what I was saying shifted to, they can't hurt me. It's no big deal, and all of that. And now the planes go by and I'm basically systemically calm. And I just did EMDR on myself. Same as I love the knitting. Oh, that's brilliant.
And
Damn.
I'm over here chuckling. So I have a wild brain. And when you don't have the right tool for the task, when I am an absolute master, a master at disassembling meaning and evaluating the component pieces of a situation, a system, like an incident.
I love talking to you. You're a master at
Master.
disassembling.
But that tool is not the right tool for resolving the unruly nervous system that I have been living with.
Yes.
And I'm over here, you start talking about knitting for the emotional, the EMDR type, detachment.
Release.
And I'm over here you might as well try to wrap your yarn around a couple of cold hot dogs and knit. I mean, you could technically make it work, but it's the wrong tool. And the impact of using the wrong tool and trying to produce the right result is so huge. The process is slowed down so much that in the frustration of not making headway with the tool that used to let you go 100 miles an hour, but all of a sudden you're it's not the same environment anymore and that tool doesn't function. And then you got a fucking lap gan that smells like goddamn hot dogs and you can't wash the smell out, right? So the importance of, and part of the problem is that no one knows what the tools are. It's hard to discover. What are your options and how do they work? Where does it work and where does it not work? Where is EMDR useful and where does it fall down? Where is IFS useful and what are its limitations? Should I just have somebody Reiki me? Is that enough? Is it worth adding into the mix? How do I handle my overeating? Is nutrition enough of a response? Or is it worth the ingredients that go into dealing, just even dealing with trauma, living with it successfully, and then trying to reverse some of those effects. It's so
Well, Brian,
complex.
it really is. And one of the things so this is really speaks to my heart. So one of the metaphors that I use for coaching versus neuroscience coaching. So I teach neuroscience-based coaching. And what I will say is coaching in general, and I'm a big believer, I think it gets malused. People use the word wrong, but if
Sure.
you're doing coaching in the way it is designed to be done, it is generally pretty good. But it's like a broad spectrum antibiotic. It works on a lot of things. However, there are things that happen where it doesn't work or it doesn't work as quickly or it's not strong enough. So if I have a better understanding, and back to what you brilliantly said, which is language, what is the language that my client might be using is going to point me toward what might be happening in their brain so that I can then say, okay, it sounds like this is a little out of the norm for them. It sounds like they are having a heightened stress response right now. So it may not be about the exact issue that they're coming to me for. It may be that their stress got triggered, that's blocking their ability to see something. Let me work on the stress. And
Yes.
that's what I love about having the neuroscience background is it enables me to go in kind of with a more insight into saying, this is the right tool here, rather than just throwing spaghetti at the wall, as they say.
Yeah.
Most personal development in the way that it gets organized and sold or has been, I put together a model or a formula and I'm going to teach it to you or use it on you. And it works for these 5 things. These 12 steps work for these 5 things. And if you just do this and oh, you didn't get the result. Oh, well, you didn't apply the steps correctly.
Right.
Well, it's this formulaic response to human being, which is not very formulated. It's interesting. We're very original in some ways and very not original in others. Right. And but our experience and our response to those experiences are very individualized and very different. And what I'm loving about bringing in the accurate neuroscience, because I was taught some neuroscience that was not very accurate, because I was given the pieces that were confirmation bias to what I was already trained in.
Yes.
But so now it's a lot more fun to like the whole world of it. And it's evolved. It has come the last 20
Yeah,
years.
there's more information.
Really a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like this idea about, well, I mean, it was very common in many modalities that how you cure trauma is you take people back to the incident, you have them relive it enough times until they're desensitized and they no longer have the trauma response. Boom, cured. Well, we now know, because we've done that enough. And this is how we learn, by the way, is we do muck stuff up pretty bad. But we now know, people got institutionalized and hospitalized over that because we basically just re-traumatized them and re-traumatized them and re-traumatized them until they could no longer function. So, then we medicate them. That's, this is where we can learn. My point in confronting the line, like why I'm so passionate about it, is because it's on the line we can learn. And we can learn from what hasn't been done correctly. Before we totally run out of time, I want to bring up, we've touched on it, but I want to kind of just bring up a little bit more is choice, the idea of choice, because this is another thing that I think is massively misused in this domain. And you guys have brushed on it a little bit. I think that we often coach or teach that we have choice in moments and times and things in which choice is simply just like not a thing.
Yeah.
Not a thing. It's not, you have to, we are an animal. We're a physiological, neurobiological animal that has instincts. And it's what's so extraordinary about us. And this is what I was on a coaching call with somebody this last week who was kind of an old time SD landmark person. And they had this, and it was fine. It was fine what they were saying that, something happens. I make something up about it. And then, I created all this. And then what I have to do is create a new context that overrides or underrides, is probably more accurately, if using context the way it's used there. And then that situation will occur differently and it won't happen anymore. And I was like, whoa, Nelly, there's some big steps missing in that, starting with a lot of times wait 20 minutes for all those chemicals that just flushed your brain. I mean, this is why when the police show the door in a domestic violence situation, the first thing they do is separate the people, and they usually require at least a 2-hour separation.
Snow globe is settling.
Then we can look at what tools or what work to do in this situation. So I wanted to give you both a chance to say something from your standpoint. Is it even possible to choose to change your neural pathways? And if so, what kind of timing does that take? Brian, you keep, so eloquently bringing up that so much of our trauma is this emotional response that we're trying to use a language to cover. So anyway, let's just focus in on choice for a little bit. What have we learned about choice?
So I want to run first. That way, Anne, you can pick apart and correct or like fix anything that I state that is not sound. So first of all, we got to deal with choice itself, right? Like we are unwilling to have an experience of being alive that includes that we don't have choices. So choice is hardwired as like survival or power and it's partly, the whole like evolution of people from cave people to we have nothing left to survive. So we have to survive our thinking. We have to survive capitalism. We have to survive like shit that doesn't actually sink its teeth in you. Choice to I'm
going to give a shout out. I'm just going to give a shout out right there. There are a lot of people living in our society that are still dealing with basic survival.
There are like
I understand what you're saying.
Situations.
It's not the same as in the cave days, right?
And as we pick apart choice, like there's when choice is accessible and when choice is not accessible. A lot of times in real threats to survival, choice is not accessible. It is a hardwired response. I scream before I realize it's not actually a spider.
Yep.
That's not a choice. You could explain this to my husband about why I gasp when he's driving. going like, don't do that. And I'm like I had a choice. So anyway, I do all the driving now. That's
So
how we resolve
there
that.
are situations we find ourselves in where choice is not an option, where what we're going to do is pre-recorded by what we've already been through. It's like we are not a mixtape. You can't just go record over that embarrassing song that you loved when you were 12. Like the thing that happened to you when you were 12 and the way that it is recorded in your nervous system, in your responses, in your reflexes is not such a simple thing to go rewrite. And it's not a thing that you choose when it rears its head. The thing in like large group awareness trainings and human potential that gets trained first is to question yourself. You have to always stop and question yourself before you speak. Stop and question your behavior before you do a behavior. You have to always exist in this state of self-doubt so that you're always facing choice instead of response or reaction. And what that denies is that some of the responses and reactions are physically happening inside your meat bag.
Yeah,
And those
fair enough.
you really have no say over, especially when everything is boiled down to choice. So I shared my story of like the big whopping incident in the war zone. And I recently was in a conversation with someone about the marriage of hypnosis and NLP to like navigate some of the emotional attachment, like to separate the what happened and the response and like allow for a diminishing of fear. And the thing that they said after I shared that incident was like, and it was the first time I ever really heard somebody understand that I did not choose. I did not choose whether to pull the trigger or not
You did.
in that moment. There was no choice.
Yeah.
And it spoke to like a core, like primal part of me. How that came out. That I did not pull the trigger in what could have been a life-threatening situation, he flagged as an indicator of an innate goodness that is like breathtaking to like recognize. I think even sharing it with you on the show, there's this sense of like an inability to really get to that we don't choose. How we're going to react is how we're going to react. And unless we understand those things, both like intellectually and physically, like we have no shot at being any different. And it takes approaching both the interpretation, the meaning, the intellectual, like mixiness, and understanding the way the body works. You get flooded with input when a situation arises, and that input is as much a factor as your ability to rationally think,
Yeah.
if not more so. Your internal state is actually the context that gives your possible actions, not the thing to disregard so that you can choose actions based on your intellectual commitments.
Right,
And
which speaks right to the problems with that whole what's going on with you internally is what there is to put aside, which is a kind of
yeah,
has been. I don't know if they're still teaching it, but for a period, it was a very core teaching in the landmark.
yeah.
And it's
And there's
very
really like coming to,
Western,
yeah. So
you
go
know?
ahead, Ann.
Oh no, I don't. So I'm just making some notes here. Like, so I would agree. Couple of things that I want to add. I mean, what you're speaking to, Brian, is why in the military and with first responders, why they do drills. So that because they are aware that in high stress situations, you need to do what is muscle memory. That
Right.
is
Wondering
the
about that because a friend of mine, and I'll put this in the notes. There's a Gavin Becker wrote this amazing book like in the 80s, The Gift of Fear.
Gift of
Then recently did a really good masterclass on it, which is free on YouTube, and I'll link it in the notes. It is, which is really understanding some of what you're talking about, this physiological response. But for our first responders and, our warriors, they need to override some of that, which is what that training's about. And that's why, like when Werner showed us the Full Metal Jacket video with the Marine drill sergeant screaming in the face of this recruit, even though even in that environment, I don't particularly agree with that kind of thing, but I understand it. Like this recruit could potentially be in a situation where they don't have 2 seconds to make the decision. They're going to have to, like that. That's appropriate. It's not appropriate, folks, in a personal development seminar.
No,
And that's
or
what I had to reconcile with. I had
or
to get
in life, it's not, we don't learn well when we physiologically do not feel safe. But there is this place of, you have to drill muscle memory, something that bypasses. So what is literally happening to your prefrontal cortex, which is a lot of decision making, analysis, things like that. I have come to the belief that the whole brain participates in everything, not that there's an area that does this, another area that does that. But prefrontal cortex is really critical for choice. And what happens in a stress situation is certain chemicals, primarily dopamine and norepinephrine, will flood this part of the brain in order to focus you toward the one thing you need to do. And if you've ever been in extreme stress, and I think about a time that I was being really yelled at. This wasn't even in war. I was just being really yelled at. And it literally, I remember this, I could no longer hear the words they were saying. It sounded like Charlie Brown.
I had this experience with a landmark trainer. She actually told me she was going to do it ahead of time. She said, I'm going to yell and you're going to not be able to hear me, but just
Yeah.
follow my cues. It was
Because that's what that does. You start, and literally everything went black around the edges. Physiologically, I could only see forward. I couldn't hear anything because what it's designed to do is take this part of the brain offline so that you're not thinking about what to do. And that's what extreme stress does. So no, you're not making a choice. You're doing habit, you're doing muscle memory, you're doing adaptive strategy, whatever that was. And if your adaptive strategy early in life was to disappear, that's probably what you're going to do, or fawn or whatever. What I would say about choice. So then there's another factor, which is, I think it's a continuum. From that on the far end of like, I can't make a choice. Like I had I couldn't think of what to say or how to respond to these people who were yelling at me. I could think of it later, but not in that moment. I had no choice. I just actually hung up the phone. Now, there's a continuum there. We can learn through things like through the process of neuroplasticity, we can learn areas where we can give ourselves more options for response. So when I first came back from Colorado and the planes were going overhead, I didn't have a choice about how upset I was. Right? I was just upset and my body was responding and my heart was beating. And I mean, this may sound really silly, but I'm very sensitive to noise. So my heart's beating and all of that. And then I, did some work to expand that. And now my experience, it may not even be choice anymore. It's not like I have a different choice. It's having a different impact on me because I did this work intentionally to calm down my nervous system and to decouple the noise of the planes from a feeling of threat. And I had the choice to do that at a calm time. I said, I'm going to try this next time to do that. But even in that moment, it's not like I'm choosing not to be upset. I'm just not upset because I did something to help my brain relearn. And we have this possibility because the brain can sort of stop going down old pathways, start going down new pathways. However, and this was one of the questions you asked, like, can people learn? Depends on the process, and it can take a long time. And this is where they find things like well-facilitated psychedelic work can speed up some of that process of kind of decoupling the trauma from the physiological. That's what I would say.
Beautiful. Well, I think that what happens when I think about things like the form or the LGATs specifically. So LGATs really refer to a quick fix course done probably in a group setting, right? So in other words, 3 days and an evening, right, is our landmark forum. And I think we've misidentified. I just saw something in when you explained dopamine, because we now know that those LGATs are designed to create a peak experience, a
Yeah.
dopamine high, right? So I thought that was interesting when you brought in that dopamine actually shuts down executive function, because we're told exactly the difference, or slows it down anyway.
Yeah.
But what happens in those kinds of programs is you get told what that high is. That's a breakthrough. That's your transformation. And I can now see why you're so suggestible. Then you kind of, usually when you come down a little bit and you're having to explain it to a friend, is when you backfill in what the transformation was or what the breakthrough was. Because you don't, in the moment, it's like you're in this group environment. Everybody's like, yes, I'm freed. You're like, me too. It's like a concert. You know how you go to a
When
concert?
you don't sign up for that you had the breakthrough, you're gonna freaking get processed until you do. And so there's
Yeah, or
huge
you're not going to fit in or
pressure,
whatever. Yeah.
to be like, yeah, me too.
Right. And so then you backfill, but it's later, right? You backfill in like, well, what was the transformation you had? Well, let me think, and then you kind of create, this is like totally my experience. When I started to learn all this from the neuroscience, I was like, oh my God, that's so true. Now, sometimes what I backfill in is really useful. I mean, it's great. It wasn't all bad. Sometimes it wasn't necessarily bad, but it was a shortcut and it didn't deal with the greater complexity. So then it's confusing when 2 weeks later, so they say on average 7 to 10 days is the length of time of impact of that kind of peak experience. After that, then those negative feelings come back, or that conditioning or those habits or those responses come back. And then I think transformation failed. Transformation didn't work.
And it's gonna be on you
And it's
that it
on me. Well, because and then that'll get reinforced if you tell anybody, because they'll say, oh, well, you just need more practice. You need more practice, but practice is always only available through their thing. So, we can see how it works. But I think my aha in this conversation a little bit is like, oh, we just do really want to believe in these magic pills. We really do want to believe in instantaneous fixes. And we kind of have an imagination that just kind of helps us along that desire. But reality of life generally shows it up, right? And it's like, okay.
If you want to talk about limiting beliefs, the belief that we should be able to get over it.
Well, doesn't
No,
that one start early when
no,
you're a kid?
you
Just get over it.
can't.
You
You just
scraped your knee, get over it.
we cannot just get over it.
yeah.
That's a myth that does incredible harm.
Mm.
And what I've seen as I've watched people and walked alongside people healing, particularly from narcissistic abuse, toxic relationships like that, is the place people really find themselves is in loving community. Loving, supportive, compassionate, understanding, often where they take what happened to them and use it to serve, like you're doing. Like I follow a little bit culty, which is where I first
It's
found you.
part of the healing journey. It comes a little bit later, but when you start wanting to,
It
yeah,
can
give that.
some people, and I've often found the biggest healing sort of naturally occurring as they activate their own heart chakra and their own compassion without any intention, like, this is going to help me heal. But it's just, it's Brian, I was so struck by the compassion that you spoke with about your friend, that act of being a compassionate listener with her. You're not doing it so you can heal, but it's healing to you as well. We heal together. And I think this is what you have really generated around Landmark and LGATs and all of that, is a healing force.
Yeah. I want people to know that it didn't work because it's not designed to work.
Mhm. No,
I
it's
want
designed to
people to
make
know
money,
that
so if it works.
what did work is because you are designed to work, because you took an insight or a tool or a breakthrough and you did something with it that made a positive and lasting impact in your life. You did that. And I said this when I was a leader. I mean, this isn't just from everything I've discovered in the last several years, but no, you did that. If you had a transformation of something in your life, you did that. If it doesn't work, they did that, I'm not- which is completely the opposite, right? Usually it's the other way around. Like, no, it's because they did that. And the more I've come to understand these tools better as they're actually more useful, quite honestly. I mean, I tell people now, like an LGAT is one should only be done if you're in a well spot. And you should regard it as kind of a can opener. It's going to open a can and there's going to be worms in there or there's going to be pineapple in there. I don't know what's going to be in there, but and it's the beginning of something. That's why I love my platform. We call it, it's a safe place for lifelong learners, because I think we're all lifelong learners in one way or another. So how do we do that safely? And part of it is understanding ourselves, not just understanding the tools, but understanding ourselves. Anyway, Brian, any last words? We're going to wrap it up here. We could talk forever.
Really, we could continue this, but people
Yeah,
Oh my gosh. And I don't know if I've said this here before. I may have, but it's not so much about finding the way. It's not finding the way. It's about trying a way and keeping going. Just try it. Try something and keep going, and always be willing to try something and keep going, and listen to your instincts, because they're fucking built in to keep you
brilliant.
safe.
100%. I mean,
Absolutely.
I think that's the only, big underline to that. And the other thing I want to say is I believe, and I think it's partially because I want to believe this, but what I'm seeing and what I'm believing is we are moving into an age without gurus. And I think that's a very healthy aspect of human development. And it comes back to, if I don't have the guru, if there's not the person I'm following, then I have to learn what my body is telling me. Who are my safe people? Who are my energizing people? Who is my community that lifts me up? You were talking about dreading going to work. What is the job where I don't dread that? Listening. I will say your brain will lie to you, but your body won't. And that's how if you're not going to follow the guru, you can follow your just back to you, Brian, your sense of things, but you have to learn how to listen to it.
Well, that's really brilliant, because that includes if your body is overreacting, or it's over
Yeah,
responding like to the planes overhead, that's where you want to go to work.
yeah.
Not like, oh, wow, look at that, but you don't start with the words, you start with the body. Okay, well, let's just sit down here and listen to planes for a second. That was the thing I said, that when I was in that coaching call with the other person, I said, look, I would just put in one thing here is, before you create something new, actually just sit with what's happening. Take some time to identify, like, wow, how is that making me feel? What are those responses? So that then I can start to actually work with what my body is, the gift that my body is, the gift that my emotions are, that my instincts are, because they really are a gift, an enormous gift to us.
And if we haven't done that previously, don't beat yourself up, because the conversation for like emotional healing as a function of like emotional work, like energetic work, like nervous system work, that's new. Like Anne said, it's neuroscience has really only been around for like 60 years. They've only had brain scans for 30. Like that, we've been trying to deal with despair, doom, like self-judgment, and all of the like shame and guilt and fear that we've been trying to deal with those things logically is the result of logic being the only tool we knew at the time.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And like, I just want to throw it back around to try a thing, try the next thing, try the new thing. Learn what you're interested in and what you're not interested in. Go at the pace that's comfortable for you, that's not going to have you pump the brakes on your healing. Like, if you haven't been listening to your
Or
body.
have you charged too hard into it? That was the
Yeah.
only thing I wanted to go at the pace that is right for you.
Yeah.
Or mortgage your freaking house because somebody's promising you, the wonderful fix if you just pay them 10 grand or whatever it is. Be wary of that. Be wary of people who are charging too much because they're about
Or
something.
offering a
Right.
fix, let alone a quick fix. Those are just
Yeah.
red flags. Like, never step beyond your capacities financially, emotionally, spiritually. Just don't. You know where that road is. You actually do if you start to turn that on. And most of these programs try to teach us to override that, and that's what we need to take back. We're never going to get rid, I say this all the time, we're not ever going to get rid of all the predators, but we can really educate ourselves so that we're not walking into their mouth.
Yes. Well said.
We don't,
On
you
that
go,
note,
look at that. There's a predator over there. I'm going to stay on this side of the glass. I mean, I'm one of those people that likes to observe them. So I'm like, look at that. Wow, that's fascinating. But I need to do that from over here, not sitting in
yes.
their
Yes.
clutches.
Love
You
it.
guys, thank you so much. This was I knew this would be a delightful conversation, and it's fun. This is the stuff I sit around thinking about all the time and engaging with. And I knew the two of you would just be the perfect people to have this conversation in particular, as well as many others. So I'm sure we'll do it again. And just really appreciate your time today. We'll put all the stuff in the notes. And for those of you out there, I like to just always put a little shout out. I put it in the notes every time. We, about a year and a half ago, so many people started coming to me after my book came out, because I suddenly became the place where they could talk about these experiences that there had been no place to talk. Anyway, I went and got Rachel Bernstein, who is an amazing therapist across the board. And she happens to be a cult educator. So she's this wonderful blend. And we started what I call the Healthy Healing Group, which is as much about learning as healing, just kind of learning, wait, what are these dynamics? What is that's really going on? Why did I end up over there and stay over there for so long? And what might have been, so all the questions, all the things. So just always want to give a shout out for that. Please, if you or somebody you know is sort of struggling with these things, we have a sliding scale, really cheap pay thing. We want it to be accessible to anybody who needs it. Don't be alone in exploring these things at all. Come find a community of people. And I always offer that as a resource. So thank you very much, everyone. And we'll see you next time on Confronting the Line.